Welcome to the Female Stoic podcast. My name is Stephanie Poppins, and I am an advocate for literary empowerment. That means I believe the examples set by the literary masters can broaden our life perspective, create increased self-awareness, and empower us to overcome the obstacles we encounter here in the 21st century. By listening and referring what we hear to Stoic philosophy, we can foster a strong sense of self and navigate the world more effectively. This podcast takes the form of both discussions and meditations. And if you like what you hear, you might consider looking me up on my socials, where I post empowering videos every day. Or you may like my classic audiobooks and original stories available on my website, neworldbooks.uk. Happy listening. Hello, and welcome to today's episode of the Female Stoic podcast, all about Mary Wollstonecraft today. Now, if you don't know about Mary Wollstonecraft, she was a writer who was influenced by the Bluestocki group. She shared their advocacy for women's education and intellectual empowerment. And then she went on to move beyond their more conservative social views to adopt a more radical style of feminism. This was in the 18th century. And as you know, the Female Stoic podcast is all about that connection between the Bluestockings, Stoicism and literature itself, and the female literary masters. Mary Wollstonecraft's book being a vindication of the rights of women. But before we begin, I would just like to mention 2 new courses I have coming up on Insight Timer. Primarily, my courses on Insight Timer are all about journaling and how I can support you in your journaling endeavours. As we know, journaling is quite an important part of the Stoic journey. We seek to incorporate this into our practice as a way to self-reflect, to check in, and to compare developmental stages in our Stoic journey. And of course, as I always say, if you are looking for performances of English literature that do justice to the quality of the work itself, please check out my audiobooks, where you can find anything from Pride and Prejudice, Jane Austen, from Charlotte Bronte, Jane Eyre, to more light-hearted works of Victorian fiction, such as Anne of Green Gables, for instance. And of course, my original period audio dramas that I wrote myself. If you have been listening for a while, I would just like to also request if there is something in this episode that caught your attention or in fact inspired you to say something, please would you leave a comment or share the episode so that the Female Stoic podcast can continue in its educational endeavours for both men and women. So to today's question. And this question is all about the noise floor. It's all about the voices we are seeing represented in the social sphere, the female voices at the moment, and just how honest a representation of women's voices they are, and whether in fact the wrong messages are being promoted or messages that are detrimental to women and the representation of such, the education of such. And this is where Mary Wollstonecraft comes in. Now, Wollstonecraft engaged with Bluestocking philosophy in her 1789 anthology, The Female Reader, when she quoted and engaged with thinkers like Elizabeth Carter, who translated the works of Epictetus, a famous Stoic philosopher. Wollstonecraft then went on to write a vindication of the rights of women in 1792. This was a direct critical response to the more conservative educational theories favoured by many of the Bluestockings. Now, the Bluestockings were the originals. They argued that maintaining female dependence, but educating ourselves within that sphere, rather than true independence, was a solid step to empowering women. And of course, when you look at the constraints, the societal constraints they were under, that made sense. Real change is affected by small steps continually, as I have mentioned in previous episodes about Stoic discipline. Look out for those. Small steps made continually will actually set a stronger foundation in place. And of course, the Bluestockings were some of the first steps to be taken. So Wollstonecraft here is acknowledging the significance of these, and she is making further steps. She is building on the foundations the Bluestockings made. So she's moving slightly away from viewing women as solely independent upon men, but she is aligning with the Bluestocking philosophy that aim to improve women's literacy and rational thought, which of course is aligning with the Stoic tenet of knowledge. We are aiming here as individuals, rather than men or women, to empower ourselves educationally as a way to honour our higher self. Again, to go back to the question about the representation of women in the 21st century, and indeed if this is honouring our higher self, a woman's virtue. So when we consider Wollstonecraft's work, she is using the intellectual legitimacy of women promoted by the Bluestockings to pave the way for her argument. And if we are wise, we then do the same in this century, I would argue. We use the intellectual prowess of the women who have walked before us, many times that is recorded now in a literary capacity, because of course we are centuries on. So we have all that work to relate to. We use that as guidance for our own development. And I would argue here that is not being done enough. Hence the reason this podcast, I believe, is an important step just one small brick in a huge foundation we should be building in order to further empower women. Strengthen the female mind by enlarging it, said Wollstonecraft, and there will be an end to blind obedience. So she wrote a vindication of the rights of women in response to a French politician's pamphlet written in 1791 on national education. You can just imagine, can't you? She believed the neglect of women's education caused great misery. If women are taught romance is the primary goal of their lives and they are not encouraged to develop their reason or virtue, she argued, they become frivolous, weak, cunning and vain. She then goes on to claim they would act as a, quote, swarm of ephemeran triflers, consumed by romantic whimsy and grovelling vices. The irony. So, relating to the question, and also looking at what she is saying, women who have nothing but romance to focus on waste their lives on superficial, temporary, or unimportant matters, things that last only a short time in significance, much like an insect ephemeron. Their lives, she argues, and I agree with this, will then be devoted to the transitory rather than anything of significance or longevity. So at this point I say, what about the popular culture of today? Are we not seeing just that? Hence, reference to the question. This obsession we have in social media with the transient, celebrated by the unlettered masses, can only lead, as we know, to the degradation of society. And so I hear you say, though women have developed as a sex, we are still scrabbling around in the mire as we were then. And yes, I would agree, but my argument here is social development means the development of available choice. Empowerment means the potential we have as women through our choices, and that is what has changed as a result of the work of these superwomen. So, I hear you say, with choice comes more noise and more ways to shock, and therefore more ways to elevate one's unlettered voice within a media system that rewards such. True. But if we compare this with the alternative, which in some societies still, believe it or not, exists, we can see the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. And we understand as Stoics it is up to us, the individual, to filter out the noise. Just because there is increased availability of something, it doesn't mean it has to be available to us. This is true empowerment. The capacity to make choices. Having enough wherewithal, enough experience, enough knowledge to understand that our development begins within. And not to blame those externals for turning our head, for our reactivity, for our own personal lack of development. It is up to us, the individual, to filter out the noise. In her critique of contemporary views of women's education of the time, Wollstonecraft looked primarily at middle-class women and considered them first as, quote, human creatures placed on this earth to unfold their faculties. She's basing her argument here on the belief that reason is what makes people human, that virtue is what distinguishes people from one another, and that virtue is attained through knowledge. This, of course, underpins a key Stoic tenet. She rejected the idea men and women should aim to acquire different virtues. She believed, which is outstanding for the time, that although men and women generally have different duties in life, they should strive for identical virtues. I love this. She said, virtue can only flourish among equals. She is arguing here that because women tended to be given a haphazard education at the time, they weren't given adequate opportunity to develop their reason and attain virtue. Their raison d'etre was to please men, to prepare themselves for only a brief period of life, that was courtship and early marriage, which of course is now almost irrelevant. And that is what this podcast is all about, a continuation of knowledge, a lifelong celebration of letters, words, ideas of understanding. Why is it irrelevant? Because there are other phases to our life of equal significance. We now understand that. Here we are seeking to champion the mind. We are seeking to commit to the virtuous and find joy in the written words of those who have struggled and conquered life before us. And as we know, when we do this and also honour each stage of our life, we come to understand that as women we have increased capacity for life beyond just our familial roles. How can we successfully build sustainable marriages, she says, or educate ourselves effectively if we are ignorant of ourselves? How can we develop as a sex if we are restricted to one transient area of life? She says, make women rational creatures and free citizens, and they will quickly become good wives, which I love. Partly is because she is playing the patriarchy at its own game. Now, as life expectancy grows, there's a massive move to embrace the autumn of life at least as much as the summer. We are now healthy enough, fit enough, and eager enough to grow personally after our children are grown, after our parents have left. In the 18th century, women were taught, instead of learning to rely on reason, they were to be driven by emotion and delicate sensibility, which of course did not prepare them to be good wives and mothers at all. And we come to understand now that this would leave one especially vulnerable if widowed or seduced and ruined by a man in that time, because you would be in a situation where you were left without any means to support yourself financially. Wollstonecraft concluded that women had absorbed many of these oppressive standards because they weren't taught to distinguish between reason and prevailing prejudices. And you might say here, well, we were very much only as good as the parents we were given, and that has not changed. You might argue that the familial response to education, if it were not to embrace education, if it were in fact to reject it, of a family at that time, would have been much the same experience as in the 21st century. Because as we know, we are very much beholden to the attitude of our parents from a young age. But of course, we have this wonderful thing called the internet. And for all its faults, it can be used positively to empower and to educate. So we are very lucky in the 21st century in that way. Again, going back to the question, we can be empowered by that, and we can also very much be denigrated by that. It is our choice. Again, tapping into that higher self and our own personal set of morals and values. Wollstonecraft also suggested there was a necessity of modesty for both sexes, and there was a distinction between external reputation and virtue. And this is, of course, where that Stoic element sings most loudly. We are seeking to honour our higher self by committing our Stoic practice to the four principles: wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. The ability to distinguish between what is good, bad, or indifferent. The ability to treat others with kindness and fairness. The moral courage to endure hardships, act rightfully despite fear, face challenges with endurance, and of course a self-discipline and self-control, the managing of our passions, desires, and impulses, so that we may live a balanced, moderate life. And if we're looking at the various roles we have as women and refer to Wollstonecraft, she saw duty, especially for women, the duties of motherhood and domestic life, as vital building blocks for families and thus ultimately for society. She argued that the societal pressure women face to care primarily about external beauty means they have no incentive to attend to the duties nature has given them, and this leads to unhappiness and malformed family bonds. I do not wish women to have power over men, she says, but over themselves. And she also argues that women should be of greater use to society at large. I do agree here, but as an addendum for the 21st century, I would add, if they so choose. And what I mean by that is, we as women should be able to embrace each phase of our lives as women, be supported in that endeavour, especially during our childbearing years, if we so choose to have children. It should not be, I believe, that we are obliged to dilute our focus from the commitment necessary to honour our maternal role. I believe more societal and financial support is necessary here in the 21st century. And if we consider, going back to the question, the noise online and what is celebrated, these unlettered words, these transient celebrations, we can see that there has been a significant shift, a movement away from the celebration of the gift that is motherhood, the strengths that women have, the ultimate power they have to bring forth more life, should they so choose. Wollstonecraft concludes a vindication, the focus on creating good citizens, nurturing the virtues that have taken root at home. And of course, we understand that as generations pass, it is necessary for us as women to, in fact, establish those virtues, commit to those virtues, celebrate those virtues as we are setting that example, as should men. And finally, Wollstonecraft suggested women's subordinate status is due to men's prejudices and not to an inherent weakness. She said this will be proven once women are free to develop their understanding and affections. As women are released from ignorance, they will enjoy greater independence befitting rational creatures with human souls, and society as a whole will then only benefit. Relating this to the 21st century, we have to understand that as the noise affects women, it so affects men. What I love about Wollstonecraft is she is saying what applies to one applies to the other. And my message here today is for us to be accountable, for both sexes to be accountable, for us to strive for the acquirement and the celebration of our higher self each day, in order to set that example, to celebrate each phase of our life, and to immerse ourselves in Stoic messages that support the protection of our inner peace. Epictetus said, "Only the educated are free." He is arguing here that true freedom comes from wisdom and self-mastery, not an external status we may be chasing in the 21st century. It is impossible to begin to learn that which one thinks one already knows, he says. And that is so relevant here. There's a lot of noise, a lot of uninformed voices speaking very loudly, but in fact, it is up to us to discern just how informed those voices are. So let's go on to the journal task for the day. As you know, each week we have a journal task, and today's journal task is to look at how we are educating ourselves. It's a self-reflective task in which we list the steps we are taking to expand our own knowledge. Which podcasts are we listening to? Which literature are we reading? Are we listening to a variety of music, etc.? How diverse is our range of day-to-day experiences? And just to end on this note, if you have enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate if you could leave a review or a comment. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Hey, Stephanie here. Thank you for listening to the Female Stoic podcast. It is an honour, and I just want to say I really appreciate you being here. It's amazing the power of women in literature and the Stoic messages they have to share. Please, if you can, return the favour by spreading their words and sharing this podcast far and wide, so more of us can benefit from their wisdom. And don't forget to leave a review if you like what you heard. See you next time.